Hello and welcome to this series known as Parents' Role as a Sex Educator. And what we're going to cover in this series, we're going to try and answer a lot of questions, burst a lot of myth about this word sex, which perhaps most of us are not as comfortable using it. But how important it is for you as parents to not only use this word but also to communicate the right information to your child about sexual education, sexual attitude, and how do you have healthy sexual life, because this can impact them at any age, right from being a child to an adulthood. And that's the journey which we will be doing. And this series is focused on answering some of the questions which you often may wonder, why should I talk about sex education? What is the implication if I don't? How it can impact my child's thinking and his or her attitude towards life. And the important thing is, how do I do that? And nobody did it to me. So is it really important for me to do that with my child? And I'm not comfortable. How do I broach this topic? How do I position this? Does the father has to talk to the son and the mother to the daughter, or I can do it either or? I mean, as a father, I can talk to the daughter also. There are a lot of questions and myths associated with sex education, and that's exactly what we'll try and help in these series. So every session we'll try and answer all your questions. So please share your questions and thoughts, and let me begin how we're going to do that. And who am I, first of all, to actually talk about this topic? I'm enthusiast, just like you. I really care for parents, and I do a lot of work for teenagers. I'm a teenager coach, youth mentor, and leadership facilitator. And I want to help in disseminating rightful information, credible source on sex education, because I often feel when I look at the child and have conversation, there's a lot of pent up anger or discomfort and emotional trauma which goes in if the child is not comfortable with his or her body. Yeah, and that's important as a child growing up, and it's very, very critical for critical form of information. So that's what we're going to do as parents as a role of sex educator. I'm hosting this series with someone who is the most credible source to answer all your questions around this topic. And who but Dr. Rajan Bhonsle. He is nothing less than a celebrity in this field, working tirelessly in this area for last 35 years. Dr. Rajan Bhonsle is an MBBS gold medalist MD from Mumbai University. He's a senior consultant in sexual medicine and counselor. In fact, Dr. Bhonsle has authored 8 books on sex education, which are published in Hindi, English, and Marathi. Dr. Rajan Bhonsle is also the founder, director of Heart to Heart Counseling Center and a dean of Institute of Human Technology. I can keep going on about Dr. Rajan Bhonsle. In fact, he has been named the 4th consecutive year as best doctor in Mumbai by Outlook magazine. And he contributes regularly as a sex expert in the most well-known column in Mumbai Mirror. So without ado, I have a host of questions for Dr. Rajan Bhonsle, but let me welcome Dr. Bhonsle for this session. Dr. Bhonsle.
Thank you for the introduction.
All right, let me start with the first question. Why parents should talk about this role as a sex educator? Doctor, it'll be great if you can start right there.
Yeah, I tell you, most of the topics that parents discuss with children, parents discuss without any hesitation because they find that it is necessary to educate the child, whether it is educate about hygiene, educate about education, educate about the importance of money and etiquettes, manners, but something which they should talk about with their children, but somehow they hesitate. They have their own biases. They don't know the correct language. They don't know the correct mode. They don't know where to begin, what to say, how much to say, when to say. So due to which they hold themselves back. So because of their bias, their hesitation, their reservations, they don't talk to children. And naturally, as children are growing, their natural curiosity of this topic is very natural, nature given. So they start looking out for sources. And if parents have not taught them, then naturally they will look for the sources elsewhere. It could be something like Google, it could be a friend, it could be a teacher, or it could be anyone, a neighbor or anyone. And what kind of information they will get from these sources, and whether will they be taken any advantage of because they have ignorance, they don't know much about this, as also has to be seen. That is why it is very necessary that this is an important topic. And irrespective of what career you take in your life, irrespective of what do you do in your life as a grown-up, whether you remain single or whether you remain married, you definitely need to be very comfortable with your own sexuality, because it is with you all the time. It's part of your personality. You carry it everywhere. All your human interactions often are coming from your own attitude towards sexuality, your own perception, your own ideas. So that is why it is so necessary that every person, while growing from the very childhood, feel comfortable about this topic. And who else can do this best except parents? Because parents are closest to the child. Parents care for the child. They love the child. Child trust parents. Parents spend maximum amount of time with the children. And that is why they are the best people. Children trust parents the most. Children love parents the most. Children respect parents the most. That is why parents should take it upon themselves to teach on this topic and prepare their children for uh, for their healthy adulthood. That's the reason.
There are challenges, right? Like we are, as a culture, Indian ethos, Indian values. Often it's been said that it's a Western concept. It doesn't hold true for Indian culture. What's your view on that?
Yeah, actually, it is a big myth. If you look at the history of mankind, and you will see that India is probably the only country, and Indian culture is probably the only culture who looked at sex, studied sex like a science, and presented it like an art. The oldest scriptures on sexuality, and not just one. Most of the people know only about Kama Sutra by Vatsayana, but there are dozens of scriptures. And the oldest possible scripture, which is a dialogue between Shiva and Parvati, which is documented as a Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, is a proper scripture, Hindu scripture, where the sexuality, sexual relationship between man and woman, emotions, psychology behind sexuality is discussed in detail thousands and thousands of years ago. So Indian culture has studied it, presented it, written about it, taught it since ages. On the contrary, for other cultures in the world, it is new. So it's not a Western concept, it is Indian concept. If you look at India, at Khajuraho, Konar, there are more than 40 temples even today. On the outskirts of these temples, there are all erotic sculptures, and they were created more than 1,000 years ago. And just some people felt like creating those sculptures and be created is not possible. They must have required a lot of backing from the rulers, because unless rulers, the kings allowed that, they would have not done it. Must have required a lot of money, because so many temples to be built, and it says that it took more than 100 years for these temples to be created. Almost 3 generations of artists worked on these temples. Actually, a lot of money might have been required. So the moneyed class, the rich class, provided that kind of money. Kings and emperors backed it, and artists were for it. And these are temples, so naturally religious people were involved in it. And these temples are built in the middle of a city, so even common man was in favor of it. This is what India is. So also, if you look at India, also in India we worship a symbol by name Shivlinga. Every little village also, if you go to see, you will see that Shivlinga temple is always there. There may not be any other temple, but Shivlinga is always there. And Shivlinga is what? It's not a face of Shiva. It is a symbol of a union of a man and woman, and that is worshipped in India. So India has always looked at sexuality and sex education in a very scientific way. in a very pious. It's also a path in a spiritual path of a human being according to Indian scriptures.
Yeah.
Our culture has always believed in studying this as a science, teaching this to each other, and going deeper into sexuality, even as your spiritual path. That's why
Interesting.
it is not a Western concept. Actually, it is an Indian concept, and probably West has learned the importance of it much later, and we
That's
had
in,
known the importance of it since ages.
Wow. And doctor, I think that's interesting that I'm sure before this, none of us would have made that connection. However, we are living in a very different world and a different context also, doctor. If you really look at parents, most of the parents thinks that they've never been taught about something like this, and they are pretty much living their life, and it's such a natural and instinctive process. You don't have to teach it formally. So what's your view? Is that really required to be talked about?
See, this thought that it is natural and instinctive and not be taught comes with the bias that sex education means only teaching about maybe a genital centered sex, like a sexual intercourse. Actually, if you look at the entire curriculum of what exactly is taught in sex education, it forms only 2%. Telling children about sexual intercourse is only 2% of the entire curriculum. Rest 98% is something else, where we prepare children at correct attitude. Sex education is not merely genital centered sex, it is preparing their attitude. It is guiding their behavior. It is making them feel comfortable with their sexuality. And there are a lot of things involved. For example, a knowledge about contraception cannot be natural. One has to learn from it about it. Knowledge about sexually transmitted diseases is not instinctive. You have to learn about various sexually transmitted diseases. And even knowledge about the legality and the law related to and around sexuality is not instinctive. So naturally, what is instinctive is probably the sexual impulse, the sexual desire. But the behavior around it has to be taught. Like, for example, eating or visiting a toilet is also very natural, but still we do toilet training to children. We teach even how to eat. We wash our hands before eating. We teach even table manners to children. Animals don't have to learn that. So naturally, with every instinct of human being, some education comes along because we are living a civilized life. We have to, and we are not alone. We are relating with people. We are interacting with people. We are in the company of people. So you have to have a certain behavior and certain attitude which portrays the correct behavior and correct image and correct ideas. So that is why, though sexual instinct is very natural, lot that is included in the sex education is not merely teaching them about sexual intercourse. It is a very small portion. There are lot of other things that we teach in sex education to children. For example, how to protect yourself from being sexually abused by a stranger, or by a stranger, by someone known to you, maybe a relative, maybe a neighbor, maybe a teacher. Now, that's not going to come instinctive. And the incident of sexual abuse is so high, all over the world. So, unless, and you can't accompany your child everywhere. The child is going to school alone, going to be in school alone, he's going to on a playground alone, he may be traveling alone. And anywhere, any of these places, he could be sexually abused by just anyone. So unless you have trained the child to protect oneself, even though there is no adult accompanying, it can't be instinctive. It has to be taught from outside. How to be
Well,
comfortable with how to be comfortable with your own sexuality. Because lots of thoughts come, lots of feelings arise, and they come like a flood in response to certain hormones. And if the child is not taught about it, how to deal with it, what to do with these feelings, they don't even know these are sexual feelings. How to deal with these thoughts? Unless they are taught about it, trained about it, they are likely to feel very overwhelmed and likely to feel very strange and may not know how to go about conducting themselves and even behaving in the presence of others and how to deal with their emotions and thoughts. That is why they definitely need to be educated and made to feel comfortable.
very well point, doctor. And I think I'm just listening. If the parents are listening and they're just, if I pick up their thoughts at this moment, one of the thought cross their mind, as you rightly said, just like toilet training, it's a simple training which you use. But the comfort with that word sex, like if I say the word sex, there is something happens. I'm so uncomfortable with that word sex. Why can't we call it physical education, reproductive system? Make it, why are we making it so out there? These are the thoughts which comes to parents mind, because you're not comfortable. As a child is growing up, as 3 year, you touch the genitals, you say dirty, don't touch. I mean, so you have such a strong orientation, doctor, and that word sex is directly connected to physical relationships, more than the emotions and the aspects of intimacy which you're talking about. Doesn't occur naturally to none of us. How do we break that?
See, basically, this all comes from the bias in the parents' mind. Even when parents were little kids, they never knew the word sex. We didn't know any language. We learn all the words. Even the simplest of the word, we were not born with the knowledge. So naturally, when you are born, you start learning the language. You learn the language what parents are teaching you, or you are picking up from the parents and the people around. And secondly, so the word, if anyone, a parents or any adult has a bias towards the word sex, because that's what they have bought, that's what they have learned. So a wrong education is being transmitted. On the contrary, you have to stop that. It's a good English word. It conveys a certain meaning. It's not a dirty word, absolutely not a dirty word. It is a scientific word. And if you use a scientific word for a certain aspect of your body physiology, certain aspect of your emotional world, certain aspect of your psychological world, certain aspect of your feelings, your thoughts, your behavior, it's a perfect word. So I am very much for the terminology sex education and not physical education. Physical education means anything else, but you are focusing on a particular aspect of our personality. So one has to use the word sex education and no other alternative word. I'm very much for it.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add to that, doctor, because in the last few years, I've seen another word which is very commonly used, especially in school: good touch, bad touch. Just to avoid that or reframe that word. Is there a view of yours on that?
Yes. See, actually, I don't like this terminology good touch and bad touch because very often the abuser who touches the child, who abuses the child, may not touch in a violent manner. It may not even hurt the child. So child is confused, it feels good. So why should I call it as a bad touch? A sexual touch by abuser to a child could be very gentle. He may not come across as some violent person. On the contrary, invariably their behavior is such that they will win the confidence of the child. They will be friendly with the child. They will say, oh, we'll play some secret game. They will even gift the child with something that child wants, maybe some sweets, something to eat, maybe a toy or whatever it is. And once they have won the confidence of the child, then they will, in a very gentle manner, introduce this topic without calling it as an abuse, though it is an abuse. And that is why child is confused. Oh, this feels so good, so this is supposed to be a good touch. And bad touch in the child's eyes is something that hurts. That's something which is not comfortable, something which is painful. So using the terminology good touch and bad touch is not the correct. One has to use appropriate and inappropriate touch. And then even that terminology could be difficult for a child to understand because appropriate, inappropriate. So what is appropriate touch? One can give examples like shaking hands, a pat on a back, or a high five is appropriate touch. But touching private parts, caressing your body in a manner that appears strange to you is inappropriate. So rather than using the word good touch and bad touch and confusing a child, because sexual touch by an adult to a child could feel good, and he may not know what is called as good touch and bad touch. So that's not the kind of terminology I am for. I feel that appropriate and inappropriate touch is the correct way of teaching children and giving them examples. What is appropriate touch? What is inappropriate?
Wow, doctor, this is I'm so amazed because the media has been talking about this for so many years now, and school has been promoting this word. But what a beautiful connection you made, because yeah, absolutely, the sexual touch feels good. So why would a child call it it's a bad touch? A great point to note. I mean, also there are a lot of parents who are often wonder. Uh, I mean, 2 points comes to their mind, and constantly these question comes. One is, what is the right age? Should when should you broach this topic? How early? How late? What is the implication? I mean, if you can just start with that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. See, I always say that, that giving sex education to your own child is loving your child, because you can do it best. Others may take advantage of it. Others may not do a good job. Others may not have that correct knowledge, correct terminology. Others may also, as I said, can take advantage of the fact that child doesn't know anything. So parents should take this upon themselves. Why? Because they love the child. So you don't go and ask someone, when should I start loving my child? Here your child is born, you don't require anyone's permission, and there the love arises in your mind for your child. So if giving sex education is loving your child, the moment child is born, the sex education actually begins at that point. You don't have to wait for the child to become adolescent and teenager. Here the child is born, and there the sex education begins. Before even you start teaching child a language, a verbal language also. So the moment child is born, in a way, sex education begins at that point. It is not at some later date, one day when he will become 5-year-old or 10-year-old or 15-year-old or before his marriage. No, these are the wrong notions. Sex education begins the moment child is born.
Wow, isn't that wonderful? That's the end of the first series, first part of the series. And what we heard is the why of sex education, what is the right way of doing it, and when. When is the key question, is when the child is born, sex education should start. Yeah, and please share with us your questions, your comments, your insights, what you've taken away in the comments section. Also, you can write to us on an email. The details are mentioned in the comments area. So please share with us how did you feel and what questions you like us to ask, and subscribe on this channel, just because you'll know when the next part is coming. So we're going to shoot every session once a week and take your information and position it to Dr. Rajan Bhonsle and get the right information in this series. So join me and make sure you make others join as well, because this is an important information. It's very, very critical for parents and their role to be a sex educator. So please share this with others as well. Thank you so much.